Good morning, David Burns, Chairman of the English Business Council. I'm delighted to welcome Rohit Talwar, CEO of Fast Future, this morning to talk to us about what he does and some exciting new developments. Rohit, good morning.
Good morning, David. How are you?
I am fine. Perhaps you could tell us a little bit about yourself and Fast Future.
Yeah, I'm a futurist. So ever since I was a child, I was always fascinated by what was changing in the world and was captivated by the moon landings. And there was a program in the UK called Tomorrow's World that talks about a lot of science and technology that might be coming in the future. And I was always fascinated by not only the developments that were being talked about, but what would that mean? How would my life change? Coming from a relatively poor background in the UK, how would my life change? How would my world be? And as I grew up, I was always interested in that same space. And I did electronics computer science at university. So I guess having got excited about the future as a kid, I then went into artificial intelligence after university and then into consultancy and got really curious about why companies were doing what they were doing. Sometimes they had a really powerful view of the future. Quite often that was simply based on hoping that the future would be like the present or the past. But I found a few companies that were actually really using some interesting ways of exploring the future, like Shell with their scenarios. That got me intrigued.
Right.
I started to research it and discovered there was this profession called futurist, where you were paid to think about the future and what might happen next. You're basically paid to imagine and to dream. I could think of no better job, and so I thought I'm going to be one of those. So I've done lots of different forms of training, created methods and tools, and I spend my life now talking about the future, whether it's on a stage or at the moment via video, helping companies and governments think about what might shape the future and then what are the possible scenarios that play out. So right now, I spend my entire time talking about scenarios to different industries and how do they prepare not only for the most optimistic ones, which is what we all like to do, but right now, how do we prepare for those kind of worst case scenarios? And as a company, that's what we do. We speak, we do a lot of executive education, we do customized research studies, public research studies, and we publish books about the future. And we have the book coming out on June the 1st called Aftershocks and Opportunities, Scenarios for a Post-Pandemic Future.
Okay, we'll get on to the book in a minute. You talked about Tomorrow's World, which is a series that I remember vividly. And in fact, somebody is now posting snippets of Tomorrow's World programs. And I saw one the other night, and it was about Tomorrow's World introducing the mobile phone, which I thought was hilarious, absolutely hilarious. When I first arrived in Dubai when I came back to Dubai in 2008, I went into the Capital Club, and one of the management team members was Shanaz Pakravan, who used to be on Tomorrow's World.
Wow.
So that was for me, that was quite a wow. It was a wow moment.
A flashback.
Flashback, yes. Futurism. I'm fascinated by futurism like you, and I need a job like yours, so we'll get around to that later. Fast Future, what you were saying that you address governments. This will be edited, by the way. Fast Future, you deal with governments and individuals, and you must have been doing that a lot online. Has the current situation changed any of that?
Absolutely. So everyone now is living their life online. There's some real benefits to that because for a lot of people, commute time has gone. And maybe your meetings get shorter because people want to get on with their own work. They don't want to spend their entire life in meetings. But it can also be tiring. I think when one spends the entire day on the screen, in video conferences, presenting online, and that goes, as I was saying to you earlier, from 7 a.m. till late at night. That can be exhausting. I was talking to someone who runs an airport in India yesterday, and he said literally his day, when the airport is not very busy, all they're doing is cargo at the moment. He said he's never been busier, and all of it is in video meetings.
Hmm.
So the world is changing. Our working practices are changing. I think some of this will stick, but also that desire to get back to human connection, to being
Yep.
in an office, that will also come back quite strongly, I think.
Not long ago, I had a conversation when I had to change my phone from a BlackBerry, because I was a BlackBerry. It was my favorite phone, and I had to change for all sorts of reasons. And the guy I was talking to said to me, my phone never stops ringing. And I said, there's an off button. You can turn it off. And it was like, oh my goodness, turn my phone off? Couldn't possibly. As far as this being in front of the screen all day, you can actually schedule it so you're not. But it doesn't, it's a new thing, isn't it? So are people going to do that? Do you think that we will see scheduling, but Google or Outlook or one of those where you can and can't sit in front of a screen? Do you think that scenario is going to change completely?
I think to some extent, but we're creatures of habit, and we don't like the idea of missing out on something, or missing that crucial meeting or that crucial call.
Yeah.
And also, I think what's happening now is that people think you're more available because you're at home. We know exactly where you are. You can't say, "Oh, I was in a, I was traveling or whatever." We know that the travel now is from your bedroom to the bathroom to wherever your desk is.
Yeah.
And then you might go out for your daily walk, but you're around. And so people will contact me quite late at night and say, "Can we have a quick chat?" And sometimes I'll be up for it. And sometimes if I'm exhausted, I'll say, "Can we talk tomorrow?" Because also, we have such connectivity that we can be talking to someone in Australia or Dubai or wherever, and that extends the working day inordinately.
Yes.
But I think the good thing about this technology is it's allowing us to stay connected. It's allowing us to get on with things, and it's showing us some of the things that we don't need to get on a plane for, or we don't need to travel for. That actually, it's way better to get on a call, and sometimes you can do in 20 minutes something that would have taken you 2 hours in a meeting if you travel there because you feel like you have to, and you might have flown a day to get there. So I think now we can just be more productive, and I think it lets us do interesting things that we probably wouldn't have done before. Like that last night, I just agreed to do a session in a couple of weeks' time for white collar and blue collar workers in the Caribbean and the US who lost their jobs recently. And to get on, and we're going to do 3 hours with them. I'm going to do a short presentation. We're going to do a Q&A, and then we're going to have private sessions for an hour and a half where individuals who just want to talk about their thing for 10 minutes can talk to me and get some advice. That's something that logistically I could never have organized in the past because the organizers couldn't, afford to get me out there. To do that in the Caribbean and then in the US, logistically you'd have been talking about 5 days.
Yes.
Now I can do this on.
Sorry, I'm part of the Chairman's Network, and the idea of the Chairman's Network is that you have a physical meeting, and obviously that's not been possible. And we have a meeting in the Capital Club in Dubai every 4 or 5 weeks, and when that stopped, we converted to Zoom, and then suddenly we found that we could all have a meeting in Dubai with all of the people in Dubai on the same Zoom call. But you also have somebody from Australia and somebody from India, which we'd never been able to do before because it just wasn't possible. So now that connectivity is becoming greater. I think the issue is going to be the discipline in terms of numbers that you can talk to at the same time. Because I was on a Zoom webinar type thing the other day, and there was 45 people on the call. And they were all trying to have their say. So the host muted everybody, which rather negated the opportunities to network, and it didn't work very well.
Well, I think we're learning how to do these things, and we have a sort of extended family call about once a fortnight, mainly with my family in the UK, sisters, their kids and their kids. But every now and then we bring in relatives from India. So there might be 15, 16 windows on the call. They're beautifully chaotic, but they're fun. And they're just like normal family gatherings. From a work perspective, it's much harder to do, but people are learning, and I think the idea of using breakout rooms to get people to talk in small groups is very powerful. And actually, we need to think about, what are those disciplines that we have a networking event? If there's 50 people, we don't all talk to each other at the same time. We get into small groups. So we just have to learn new ways of doing things. But at the other end, we're learning about how to talk to 2,000 or 10,000. Or I heard about an event the other day which had 25,000 people in it. One of the big corporates. They used to do these as big citywide conferences. Now they're having to do it virtually, and they're doing it in a virtual world, so people can walk around, connect to each other, just like in Second Life when it first came out. So I think there's a lot of interesting ideas and imagination coming through, and there are lots of different ways we can do it. The really interesting thing for me right now is how people are learning new ways of doing dialogue. And if you're normally, if you're in a physical meeting, sometimes one voice can dominate, or people who are scared to put their ideas forward hold back. Now there are these tools where you just type your idea in, and then people get to read lots of different ideas and vote on them. So you can get a whole range of opinions expressed, and then the community literally upvotes the best ideas in quite clever processes. And you get to see a lot more. You get to hear a much more diverse range of views, and you get to a more engaged consensus about what you need to do next. And so I think there's some beautifully powerful tools coming through on that, which is something we probably wouldn't have explored normally.
Yes.
And the other thing is I did this session with corporate event planners Monday, I think it was. And one of the things that they were saying was that this is a once in a lifetime opportunity for them to bring some real innovation to some events. So for example, we've had our company meeting this way since the founder created it in 1708, and it's never changed, but suddenly we're having to do it differently. And people are loving the new formats and the new ways of engaging and the new experiences. And the good thing is, you don't spend forever trying to organize a meeting to fit with different people's schedules, because everyone's around.
Correct. One of the things that's come out of all of this is that the solutions that we are going to need to go into the future haven't yet been invented. They're still being devised because we've not had to. This pandemic has forced us into a situation where we've got to look at things differently, completely. And I think that's exciting because nobody knows what's going to come out. Well, you might because you're a futurist, but nobody knows what's going to come out of all of this intelligence that's going around. One of the things I was not aware of was that universities around the world have been doing a lot of online e-learning for years because they get a lot more money for their professors doing research than they do out of teaching in a classroom. So university education has been online for a long time. And now schools here and around the world who are having to go online are trying to charge the same amount as if the child was in a classroom. And yet you can buy superb education from organizations that have been doing it for a long time. So that e-learning situation is going to change dramatically.
Absolutely. And you're seeing people completely reinvent their business model. I mean, we've had to reinvent our business model from, getting on a plane and traveling, 60 to 80 times a year to different, exciting locations, to doing it all from my desk. And the business model has changed. We're creating our own events, which we haven't done physically for a long time. And everyone is learning to do things differently. The interesting thing for schools and universities is that there were a lot of free offerings already, or low-cost offerings, Khan Academy, Coursera, you name it. There were platforms for delivering online content that have been around for more than 10 years. That some have had great take-up, tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of sign-ups. The universities are getting in late on the act, but they're discovering a whole new business model. They're discovering that you can offer the course for free. Harvard does this now. You can get 300, 400,000 people sign up to take the course for free. But because they want the certificate that says they've been educated by Harvard X, you can charge them relatively low amounts, like $100 for the certificate. But you only have to have, a quarter of the people who take your course sign up for the certificate. And you're talking about 100,000 people paying $100. Suddenly you're talking about $10 million for, a 10-hour course.
Yeah.
Which you could never have imagined unless you were doing it for some super wealthy family or something, and it's only going to happen once.
But don't you think that that's going to generate an increase in bogus universities? I remember years ago there was a number of advertisings for get your MBA. We'll take your CV, we'll go through it, and we'll send you an MBA, and it's 25 quid or whatever it was. And they're still around. But now that people are going to go online to learn, is there not a danger of that type of scam increasing?
I think buyer beware. There's scams in everything, and I'm hearing about incredible scams going on right now in the downturn that you think, on the one hand, you think, wow, that is so creative. But on the other hand, you think, that is really horrible, and that must be terrible for the victims. But, God bless the criminals. They've adapted and innovated and created new forms of crime for the downturn. I think now that I can get my course from Harvard for free, or from MIT or wherever, and I can pay for the certification if I want. The question is, why would I go to dodgy university? And even the Harvard course, if it's not very good, if I'm not enjoying it, I drop it and it's cost me nothing.
Yeah.
And this is the thing with online learning, that anyone can create a course, but not everyone can keep students on it. And so even with good courses, there's a massive decline in numbers. But I think we're at a really interesting point where people have the time to do a bit of learning. They have the inclination to, and it's the route to the future. So good online learning will shine through. Bad online learning will get the response it deserves.
Yeah. A recent survey by The Economist surveyed 100 business leaders and asked them how long they thought this pandemic and the lockdown and all of the restrictions will last. And over 70% in this region said it'll be over by Christmas. Now, the science tells us that that isn't the case at all, that the actual threat won't be over until we've got a vaccine, until we've been vaccinated and all that. And that could be 18 months, 2 years down the line, scientifically. A lot of countries now are adopting herd immunity, where it's okay, lockdown's not working, let's just get out there. If you catch it, you catch it. It's up to you. I think personally that's a little irresponsible, but that's only my opinion. The bottom line is, how do you see the next 2 years? Do you see that we're going to continue with lockdown, or the governments are going to try to continue with lockdown, or are we just going to say, okay, let's just get on with it?
I think it's going to vary. So you've seen the countries that have done very well and have effectively eradicated it. Hong Kong, Taiwan, New Zealand, Vietnam. They acted early. They did a number of things quickly. The population conformed because they wanted the minimum amount of pain.
Yeah.
And now they're getting back to normal. They're running normal lives. You see people bungee jumping again in New Zealand, going to restaurants in Hong Kong, going to meetings in the cinema in Taiwan. They've got on with it. And so they're looking at the rest of the world with a level of curiosity, saying, well, hang on, we got this first.
Yeah.
What is it about us that you didn't think you could learn from us? There are other places where we've acted much slower. And I think even if they're not explicitly arguing for herd immunity, that's what they're going for. And there's this sense that as much as these things are painful, we're going to have to keep going with the economy, because otherwise the consequences could be dire. and we have to try and deal with the pandemic in whatever track we can, whether that's through antigen testing to see if people have got it, antibody testing to see if they've had it, or at some point a vaccine, or hopefully some cures as well. And we don't know if any of this stuff is 100%, perfect. It's unlikely, because the vaccine is being tested on one form of the virus at the moment, and we know that there are at least 14 mutations.
Oh, I heard it's 72 the other day.
Well, there you go. So you're hearing different numbers. This is something that will be a moving picture. There's a very good chance that we may never eradicate it in the way that we haven't actually eradicated SARS or HIV or all these viruses. But we have to learn to adapt. And I understand when countries make that choice to just go both paths. Obviously, the virus tends to hit certain groups. The elderly, certain ethnic communities seem to be more favored. And I think that's more because of the prevalence of certain diseases or the living conditions for certain groups. But the poor, people with pre-existing conditions, if you've got diabetes, all those things, you seem to be much more likely to get it. So, there's just an acceptance that, a tacit acceptance that you might see higher mortality rates in those groups. And just an acceptance that if you want to keep your economy going, we have to do this. I don't think the citizenry is going to like it. I think all of us find it, unpalatable. But we also understand that in a world where we really are focused on the economy, on money, on GDP, then you have to keep that engine going. And a lot of countries are going to go bankrupt for this. It's fairly certain that this is, if you like, the end of the independence of certain countries. We could see, within 2 years, certain countries effectively being adopted by other countries and by bailout funds. And then the new model being a much closer supervision.
Yeah.
So that, Sweden might partner with, let's pick a country, Yemen, and be the one that's helping Yemen build its capacity back up, build its infrastructure, really monitoring it closely to get onto a stronger footing.
Yes, I see a slightly different scenario. And again, it's only my opinion. The world as we know it at the moment, I believe, is bankrupt. You can't spend the amount of money or allocate the amount of money that they are at the moment to overcome this issue. Trillions and trillions across the world. It's got to come from somewhere, and it can't come out of the public purse. So I think what's going to happen is that when this is over and the debt is counted, there's going to have to be a correction, like there was at the end of the financial crisis. And I think that a huge amount of money is going to be written off. I can't see personally that countries will be adopting other countries. I think there will be philanthropy, of course, and there'll be humanitarian requirements. But I'm not so sure that that's going to go to a level that will be long term. And I think we're just going to correct, write everything off, and then really go back to square one again.
I don't think there's one scenario, and that's something we explore in the book. We explore four different scenarios, but I outlined one. I think whatever happens, if there is support to weak and failing nations, it's not going to happen in the way it's happened in the past, where money was given, there was a level of supervision and monitoring, but not that much. I think this time around, people are going to say, no, we want to monitor that much more closely. Yeah. We want to monitor how you use it. We want to make sure it goes into building health infrastructure, physical infrastructure, training, new industry. So the adoption is more as a kind of coach, mentor, guide relationship. Sure. And a much closer kind of responsibility for getting you to the future. Yeah. The debt thing is really interesting. So debt is not real. I give a bank 100. It is allowed to issue 1,000. So 900 is funny money. Yep. And we don't understand this. So when you're writing off debt, you're writing off something that didn't exist in the first place. Yep. And so when you scale that up on a global level, it's all mad. And it's interesting now that central banks are allowed to print money. They call it quantitative easing. They just make money. they just create it. Yeah. individual financial institutions are allowed to create money in that they have a multiplier of whatever physical assets they hold.
Yep.
But then when they give that made-up money to another bank, that other bank treats that made-up money as real and starts again. So you have this multiplier. But what's going to be interesting is not everyone's allowed to do that. So if I'm a nation on the brink, like Afghanistan, I'm going to find it very hard to do that. If I'm the US, I can just keep doing it.
Yes.
If I'm China, I can keep doing it. And we have these kind of interesting phony wars going on at the moment, like the US-China thing. China is the second biggest foreign buyer of US debt. They have over $1 trillion of it. What is the US going to do? Is it really going to go to the brink in a fight with one of its biggest bankers?
No.
And what if it did? That'd be quite interesting. What if the US just decided not to pay back China the debt China holds? How would China respond?
Isn't it
no
that
one ever get a new mobile phone?
Isn't the thing that the Americans are now not going to consider it debt? They're going to consider it payment for the money they've lost because the virus started in China. So it's like a fine.
Well, there's that kind of rhetoric. But if that happened, I don't expect China to go quietly.
Neither do I.
And the disruption to global trade could be incredible.
Yeah.
And the impact on US firms based in China won't be pretty. The number that get kicked out, I think would be immense. And the impact on the US economy of all of those manufacturers who are currently assembling in China or making in China, being told that they've got X days to get out of the country, where X is not a very big number, that is going to be disruptive. They'll recover, but there will be a period where the US economy takes another almighty hit if they do that. So this is not consequence-free. The global economy is really complex and interconnected. Sure. And, sometimes I think these policy choices are driven much more by emotion than by an assessment of the different scenarios.
Yeah, let's get on to subject which I know is dear to your heart at the moment, and that is your book, the post-pandemic book. Can you tell us about that? Are you allowed to tell us about that? Because I know it's coming out.
Absolutely. It comes out on June 1st, so we're ready to talk about it. At the beginning of the pandemic, everyone was sort of wondering, when it sort of started to spread beyond China, it was impacting everyone. Most of our business in February was speaking in Asia, so that all disappeared. We went through an adjustment period, and by the beginning of March, we started to kind of get a sense that we thought we're not going anywhere for 12 to 18 months. It's just going to be really difficult until people have antibody tests or vaccinations. I would be very reluctant to go in large communities. And we already published books, but we just had a chat internally about, what could we do here? There's so many different views about what could happen after this pandemic. So rather than trying to pick one view, we said, let's do a multi-author book. And March the 20th, we put a call for papers out to a bunch of our friends and to people we didn't know, just via social media. We were hoping for 40, maybe 50 submissions at best, and that we'd end up with 20 good chapters out of that. As it happens, we got 115 submissions. And we got enough really, really, really good content to create 2 books. So we have one coming out on the 1st of June, and then one that's more specific to the future of particular countries and industries and themes like retirement and education, and that will come out in September. So this first book is 28 chapters. It's 25 authors from around the world exploring 4 things. So what are some of the big shifts and scenarios that could evolve from where we are, or that we're seeing the roots of? Secondly, what happens around society and social policy? The third is looking at the future of government and the economy. And the 4th section looks at the future of business and technology. And so you've got some incredible ideas in there, from scenarios of a very optimistic future to scenarios of, what happens if we declare a victory too early over the pandemic. How could that be? People talking about what are the upsides that come out of the changes? You know, how might some of our behaviors change for the better in our ways of being and connecting? What are some of those things that were trends or visible ideas in society that have got accelerated by the pandemic, where the pandemic has effectively created a laboratory for the future? So lots of really interesting ideas. And to kick the book off, we created 4 scenarios. And the way you do scenario planning, or the way most people do scenario planning, is they create a matrix. They identify the 2 most important forces that are most uncertain, but that could have the biggest impact. And for us, those 2 were, the evolution of the pandemic, which could, at one end of the spectrum, be that it just never gets eradicated, it's here forever, or it's here long term. And the other end of the spectrum is it's totally eradicated. And then on the economy, we had at one end of the spectrum a deep and long recession. And at the other end, we had, a rapid bounce back. So we got the spectrum. We didn't have the further extreme. So we didn't talk about the kind of Armageddon scenario where it all turns to dust.
Yeah.
Nor did we have the hockey stick bounce back that some people are talking about, where their economy collapses 30% in Q2 and has regained it all by Q3. We didn't go for those things. But so that gives you 4 scenarios and really interesting possibilities. If you like, the worst case scenario in our model is what we call the long goodbye, where you have a poorly contained pandemic and a deep recession. That's where we all have to learn. That's the one we all have to learn to address, because none of us like looking or planning for that. And when we do presentations about this at the moment, what you find is that less than 5% of people are doing any planning for that scenario.
Yeah.
There's a second scenario then, which we call safe but hungry, where we favor dealing with the pandemic and eradicating it over the economy. So we have lots of lockdowns and we deal with it. We help the developing world really get to grips with it. A long and much slower economic recession for us to get out of, but we come out more sustainable and solid on the other side. The third scenario we call the VIP economy. That's where we don't control the pandemic, but the economy really takes off again. And this is what we were talking about earlier.
Yep.
And there, the wealthy do well. We see that as a scenario where governments favor the wealth creators, the people working in the wealth creation businesses, the investors in those businesses. They get first access to testing and vaccination. And what you effectively see is a form of social distancing that just keeps them away from the poorer people, the people who are more likely to catch it. And some countries are already doing that. You're seeing them cordoning off areas of the poor and just not letting them out.
Yeah.
And so you could see that, and that's an investor's dream, that scenario, because a lot of people will keep working, money will be being created, but a lot of businesses fail. And there'll be the money for bargain hunters to go in and purchase assets for a fraction of their true value. And often in recessions, you see some of the biggest businesses of the future being born. And then the fourth scenario we call inclusive abundance. And that's the one where you get control of the pandemic and you get a good rebound of the economy. And we're really investing in the future. So when people are given bailout money by governments, it's tied to innovation investments by those businesses. It's tied to making sure that you're focusing on the green economy. In that scenario, there's more of an investment in the future economy, in the sectors of the future, in skills, in building capacity, in tackling the sustainable development goals. It's not all rosy and sunlit. There's still a lot of the problems we have today, but we're on a much better footing. So that's the one where people want to be. The one I would say that most people think, the majority tend to think is most likely, is the one we call the VIP economy, where the pandemic continues, but we take the brakes off the lockdowns and we just try and drive the economy, and we accept the human cost is a human cost.
Yeah. How do people get the book?
So the book is available from our website, fastfuture.com. It's on pre-order now, and I think you're going to put a slide up that shows how if you buy before the 1st of June, you can have 30% off.
Yeah.
And it's very cheap anyway. it's, you know, it's a fascinating read, whether you're a policymaker, someone in business, someone in civil society, or someone who just cares about the future for them and their kids. We just think there's an incredible range of insights, possibilities, ideas, and new opportunities that hopefully give inspiration about how we can get to a better future.
Yeah. As we discussed earlier, the English Business Council is putting together a post-pandemic preparedness initiative where we will invite people to give us their views on where they think companies and people, SMEs, etc., should be looking now to be prepared for what's going to happen 18 months, 12 months, 2 years down the line. And you very kindly offered to help us with that.
Yeah, we're going to do a few things. So we have the 115 people who contributed chapters across our books, an incredible array of thinkers and doers from across the planet. So we'll share the call for contributions with them. We have a very big database on our, you know, mailing list, 20,000+. We'll certainly let them know about it when you're ready. Yeah. We have a couple of groups on LinkedIn and Facebook dedicated to this thinking about post-pandemic future. So we'll put the information in there, and we'll make it known to a few other kind of groups of future thinkers that we know, so that you can get the widest possible global perspectives on this. Because I think what you're doing is obviously valuable for your region, and in particular for the UAE, because that's where you're based. But I think if you get this right, you get the right resources in there, the content is globally applicable. And from the first pass of it that I've seen from you and the contents, what struck me is you're not just covering what you think is a good idea, you're actually addressing the questions of real people in business today, whether it's how do I deal with this immediate issue of, you know, how do I get my workforce of 200 working remotely when, you know, we're largely manual in what we do, or, you know, we don't have the tech infrastructure, through to, well, what are the possibilities for the future, and how do I line up for new opportunities? And I think that's the exciting thing. Your book, you know, gives people inspiration to create the next solutions for their local economy.
Yep, wonderful. Rohit, thank you so much for this morning. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for joining me. It's been an absolute pleasure for us. Thank you.
Thank you. My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Take care.